So I just remembered that I needed to record this because there's a couple of people who couldn't join us in real time. So I've just hit record. So I just
Right.
wanted to be transparent about that. And also just wanted to say that T and I first, it feels like I've known you for a very long time, but I
No.
had to look it up when I met you. It was only 2016.
Wow.
Yeah, so we met in 2016. I was working in India and I flew to Bali to do yin yoga teacher training because one of my friends recommended you as a teacher. So I rock up for yin yoga training. I've got no idea what I'm doing actually. Like I don't think I'd even done a yin class at that stage. And I
Wow.
rock up for the teacher training. Anyway, I got addicted to this practice, but also to doing trainings with T. So since then, in 2017, I then did therapeutics and mindfulness. And then in 2018, I did feminine, what was that called? Womb awakening or something?
Embodied feminine.
That's it. And then in 2019, I did sexual sovereignty with you. So I have now done 1, 2, 3, 5 of your
Yeah.
trainings.
And you've assisted on 2 of those trainings as well. So you've
Yeah,
been like
right.
a student and support system.
Yeah. So yeah,
That's a lot in a short amount of time if we've only known each other since 2016.
I know,
You rock
right?
it. Yeah.
So that's why when I wrote in the blurb that you are my primary teacher, you are the person that I've had the most teaching hours from.
Yeah,
So the
right.
way that I teach is really strongly influenced by you. And the people who practice with me regularly, some of the phrases that I use are definitely phrases that you use in your teaching, right? So
You'll probably
Heidi will laugh.
Jen says in the next hour.
Right? Heidi will laugh when I say things like, it's just a sensation. It becomes a little joke, right? Sometimes we were bushwalking the other day and we were talking about it's just a, oh no, it was the Bridport cold swim. And these guys are like, it was just a sensation, right? And we make a bit of fun of that kind of stuff. But those phrases in my teaching are because of the amount of time that I've spent on the mat when you've been teaching, right? And you kind of just assimilate those things without even trying.
Yeah, well, the thing about you, Jen, is that like I remember the first training that you did, and you were in, if you don't mind me being transparent about this, you were in quite a vulnerable place and a place where you were really open and ready for self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, yeah, you probably might be echoing things that I've said, but only because you really embodied them, you know, like you really did. You were someone that was really deep in the journey and totally surrendered to it. So I think, you know, like when it embodies, even though the language might be the same, you're saying it because you know it from the inside.
Yeah, it feels like that, right? From the inside out experience, not just because it's some rote thing that, you know, you pronounce or whatever that you learn. I didn't learn it from a book. I learned it from my body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, T. So the first question that I actually wrote down was, how did yoga find you?
Just to preface before we get started, how much time do we have? Because I'm someone that could like talk forever. So with each of the questions, what's the kind of general ballpark? That
you have like 4 minutes a question. So this is quick fire, baby. Come on.
Right. Okay. So how did yoga find me?
Yeah, that's what I like to ask, right? It's not like it's kind of like it found us somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. So my very first yoga teacher I met when I was in London. I, like many Australians, after high school, decided I wanted to go out and see the world before I kind of hunkered down. And I thought I'd go away for about 6 months. And the first time I came back was 5 years later. And I've spent most of my life continuing that inquiry and living overseas. So I'd been away at that point for, I can't quite remember, maybe it was 3 or 4 years. And I was in a place of very, very deep inquiry, but also confusion. I was in this place of recognizing that so much of the way that I thought life was just a lens that I was looking through that had been conditioned by so many things that I didn't realize, you know, by my parents, by my teachers, by my society. And so there was this really uncomfortable deconditioning process happening as I was traveling more and more, because I was exposing myself to more and more things that were outside of my box. And that was both exhilarating for me and also pretty terrifying. Like, I don't know if you've had the experience where it feels like the foundation under your feet is really being challenged. So it felt like that for me. And so when I found my very first yoga teacher, he was a Siddha yoga teacher. If you're familiar with Siddha yoga, it's much more of a inquiry-based yoga than a physical-based yoga. So we did a little yoga asana, but it was always just preparation for chanting and meditation. And then we did a lot of what's called satsang, which is like question and answer. And I was that student in the room that asked 15,000 questions and had him there till midnight every Thursday night, because all of a sudden there was this source of information that I really resonated with, that I felt like was meeting some of the stuff that I was going through. But what was beautiful about it was that even though I was asking lots of questions in this way to my teacher, he was constantly pointing me back to myself and back to my practice. So that kind of started this whole recognition that I have this universe of truth and knowing that's inherent in my being, and that there was a science of yoga that could direct me to having a direct dialogue with that intuitive part of my being. And so that's how it all kind of started. And then it was only after that that I went and started studying asana. Like that came second for me. Like the larger science of yoga was first, and then asana second. Do you want me to keep talking about that, Jen?
No, I want to steer the conversation a little more into yin. So right. I just want to ask you, like, where did your passion for yin yoga come from? Like, where did you drop into that element of yoga asana practice?
So after I met my teacher, so he was a Romanian Swami who had lived in India since he was 6 years old. So he was in his late years. So it was a very strange mix, but it fascinated me enough to want to go and be in India. So I went and lived in India for just under a year. And then that kind of inspired lots of research and sitting with lots of different teachers and lots of different practices. And so that went on for about 7 years before I felt really inspired to share what I'd been learning. So that's when I was at the stage of wanting to do my first teacher training. And the first teacher training I did was like a 2-year full-time yoga teacher training. And it was a yoga teacher training that was an amalgamation of the meridian system, the 5-element meridian system of Chinese medicine, with hatha yoga. So in that whole journey of 7 years, what I had been really curious about was starting to, through just exploring my own system, how my mind and body and spirit were directly connected. And I was noticing things that didn't have an explanation or context. And so all of a sudden I found this system, this map, that really succinctly described how mind, body, and spirit were connected via the subtle anatomy. And they mapped it out as the meridian system. In yoga, it's called the nadi system. And they're slightly different, but they correlate. And so I got really excited about that map. So I studied that map for 2 years and then was teaching that for another 10 years, I think, before I came across Sarah Powers. And for those of you who are familiar with the founders of Yin Yoga, there's Paul Grilly and Sarah Powers. So Sarah's background is in yoga and in Buddhism. So she was, when she met Paul, whose background is in Chinese medicine and yoga, they kind of together created this system that was an amalgamation of those 3 things. And why that was so enriching for me was because during those 7 years or so of being deep inside that practice, I was doing a practice that stimulated a lot of movement through meridian pathways into different organs and brought up a lot of psycho-emotional content. And I was playing around in there. And yet when stuff was arising, the understanding that we store trauma in our past in the tissues, when that stuff was arising to the surface, I wasn't equipped with tools of how to be with what arises in my practice. So I was just kind of spinning around until I met Sarah Powers, and she brought in the mindfulness aspect, which was really starting to show me how I can effectively be with something that arises in a way that transmutes it and listens to it and integrates it. And that then just opened up a whole nother kettle of fish, so to speak, and then went on that journey. And I just absolutely love yin. I teach lots of different forms of yoga and self-inquiry, but yin is my absolute favorite for that reason, I think.
So T, I think we've touched on the next couple of questions that I had, and so I want to ask a more kind of specific question now about fascia. So in yin yoga, the fascia always gets a mention. So can you describe the difference between fascia and muscle, just so that that we're all clear about that. And
Yeah.
then a little about the importance of fascia within the yin yoga system.
Yeah. Okay. So the difference between muscle and fascia, they're not separate because fascia innervates muscle, but they are separate just by definition, meaning that muscle as a group of tissue is much more, contains a lot more elastin. So it's much more movable. Yeah. So I can flex and extend muscles really easily. Whereas the fascia, the different areas of fascia contain far less elastin. And so we call them more plastic rather than elastic. So there's certain areas of fascia or connective tissue that are really dense. So the connective tissue where a muscle meets the bone, for example, in a joint is areas that are very dense. But fascia innervates the entire system. Like, it's called connective tissue, and it literally connects everything to everything else. So it innervates the muscles and wraps around the muscles and joins the muscles to the bones. It wraps around organs and joins organs to the cavities they live inside of. It innervates organs and wraps around all the way down to the cellular level. So it's called the connective fabric of the body. So there is connective tissue in muscle, but connective tissue also extends far greater than that. And the reason we work with it so specifically in yin is that there's something that's called modern meridian theory. And it's been around now for about 14 years. And it's this recognition that now, because for a long time they would do Gadadas where they would, like, dissect dead bodies, and in that they would cut away all the fascia to get to what they thought was important. And now they're realizing that what they were cutting away was, was something that was of great interest. So now there's been a lot of research into fascia in this last time, and amazing things coming to the surface, one of which is modern meridian theory. And that's this recognition that inside connective tissue, inside fascia, is fluid which contains what's called hyaluronic acid. And hyaluronic acid has the capacity to draw to itself fluid 1,000 times the weight of itself. And what that does is create all these little tubes of fluid inside the tissue. And they're starting to recognize now that this multiplicity of tubes of fluid are the meridian pathways, is the whole system of nadis. And I'm pretty sure you guys are all familiar with nadis and meridians, but to get a sense of what they're like inside the body, like very similar to the blood network, right? So we have main veins and main arteries, but then a larger extension of capillaries and smaller networks, right? So it's the same. So there are as many nadis or meridian pathways as there are cells in the body, because it's through this connective fabric that life force, prana, chi, life moves all the way down to the cellular level and animates our system. So it's in this fluid of the connective tissue that the meridian pathways run. And in yin yoga, we track the 14 main channels. We really focus on the 12 main channels that move through particular areas of fascia into particular organs, so that the practice can be really specifically therapeutic in its nature. So as you guys know that are practicing already, you can do a class that's for nourishing the kidneys. You can do a class that's for detoxifying the liver. You can do a class that's for opening the heart. And the way that's working is it's working with the fluid inside the fascia, which we may or may not want to talk about how that shifts and changes if you like, Jen, later. But we're working with the fluid inside the fascia, which is highly conductive. And the less dense and dry it is, and the more fluid there is, the more that chi, life force, electricity, can conduct along these pathways and infiltrate the organ systems of the body. So we get to be really specific in the therapeutic aspect of our practice. And the last thing I'll say really briefly about this, and I'm sure we'll expand on this, is both Chinese medicine and yoga recognize that the mind, body, spirit are inseparable, and that what connects them together is this subtle anatomy. So when we're working with the organs, we're not just talking about the liver as an organ of detoxification. We're also talking about the liver as an organ that stores certain emotional frequencies and thought frequencies and certain stuff from our past. So when we're working with the channels, we're working with all what we call the koshas, which are the bodies. So we're working with the physical body, but also the mental, emotional body, the energy body, the intuitive body, the causal body. So it's this network through the fascia that connects all the dimensions of our being together. So yin yoga is very directly accessing all these different dimensions in the shapes. It's a super powerful practice.
Yeah. So, T, I think all of that would expand on what we talk about within the class, right? Because we practice a element based practice together. So we're tracking the emotions connected with those elements and those organs. So
Okay.
that kind of conversation would be very familiar for these guys on the call for sure.
Right.
Um,
Perfect.
but but I think when you explain it like that in a package, I mean, you don't have the opportunity to do that in a class, right?
Right.
Like to jam all of that information together. So I think that will be that will be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Make it
so
a little more succinct, perhaps.
yeah, right. So can you talk a little bit more about your experience in particular in relation to chi, prana, life force, and that in relation to yin yoga? So because you mentioned those terms, and we also talk about those terms when we practice together. I will use those terms interchangeably, right? Like within the practice framework.
Me
Um,
too.
yeah. So can you talk a little bit about them in your experience, but also in teaching?
Yeah. I'm just choosing which angle to go at it from. So I guess life force, if we're talking about life force moving through the meridians, it's affected by so many different things. So it's affected by the body affects the chi affects the body, you know, like they work in two directions. So, you know, if we're immobile, so just on a purely physical level, if we're immobile for a long period of time, you know, when you're sick and you're in bed for a long time and then
Well,
you
you
get up.
broke both your ankles.
Right, exactly, exactly. So that feeling of like when you get up and you feel like you've aged 30 years and you're super creaky and crunchy and feel very stiff. So just on a physical level, the viscosity of the fluid in the fascia has become a lot denser. So the tissues literally become drier, and it means that there's not a lot moving through it, which includes blood flow and chi flow. So the whole body feels stiff, and you might notice that through that, not only do you feel stiff and dense, but you might start to feel flat and uninspired and even depressed, you know, like, so many of us recognize when we get on the yoga mat that by moving around, all of a sudden there's an invigoration and a return of a sense of well-being. And so just on that level, just the movement of chi, when we start to moisten the system and get things moving again, adds this sense of vibrancy and vitality. But chi is also affected not just by mobility, it's affected by the foods that we're eating. It's affected by, and you know, in the TCM system and the yogic system, there are certain foods that we use to work with certain organs and certain energies and certain emotional frequencies, like they're all very related. Um, Interestingly, what I'm really fascinated about is it's vastly affected by the thoughts that we're thinking. So when we're aligning to particular thoughts again and again, this is not only affecting our mood, but it's affecting our tissue. So when we're constantly attaching to a thought that's out of alignment with our truth, with our essence, then that, especially when that becomes so habitual that it's a behavior and part of our personality, then that creates density in the body. It shows up as a contraction in this tissue, and the chi is no longer flowing. And you know, so there's all kinds of ways that we affect chi. But the other thing that's really interesting about chi, prana, life force, shakti, whatever you want to call it, is that in my direct experience, inherent in the I don't know what to call it, like in the substratum of what chi actually is a consciousness, a wisdom. So I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but for me, when I start moving that around and I have more connection to my body and more free flowing chi, I'm much more connected to a sense of insight and knowing and fullness and wholeness, and, you know, the qualities that in the yogic world we would call Purusha or spirit or our essence, or, you know, however you look at these things, God, whatever your definition is, it reveals itself to me through embodying the experience of this life force moving through and as my system. Like there is inherent intelligence in consciousness, in the life force that we are and are made up of. And when it's moving unobstructed, I personally have a much more direct experiential contact with that. That
So,
would be a
so
good thing to say that to you.
I just want to put a little more challenge out there to you in relation to when you talk about it right now, right? It's all very bright and cheery and you know, you're talking about, you know, that sense of connectivity or whatever. But sometimes your experience has also been a bit shitty, right? Like, and unconnected, and experiences that happen that have led you to be a bit stuck, right? So just like
not necessarily led me to be a bit stuck, but it definitely meant that I've had to move through really uncomfortable, shitty feelings for long periods of time.
yeah,
But I don't think I was ever stuck necessarily. It might have felt like that at the time, though. That's
okay.
for sure.
Sorry if I use the wrong word to describe your experience. I think I would use that word to describe sometimes my own experience. So that's about transference there. Sorry. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how the yoga practice might have helped you to move through some of that? I mean, not to talk about the experience, right, but to talk about the power of the practice to move, and how to move to that place where it's even possible to move, because sometimes you don't feel like even moving.
Yeah. Can I have longer than 4 minutes on this one?
You can. Permission granted.
Okay. So, you know how before I was saying before I met Sarah Powers and I deepened into, I was living in Taiwan at the time and I was working with a Buddhist teacher, and before that had become a part of my life, I was like playing around. I mean, not playing around. I was doing a regular deep practice, but that was moving a lot of energy around. And my direct experience of that is, you know, I would sometimes go to the mat and feel exhilarated and, you know, all of that. But other times on the mat or after, I would feel really angry, or I'd feel enormous waves of grief, or I'd feel nauseous, or I'd feel, you know, so many things. And that's when I was starting to understand that the mind and the body were connected, right? And that we store all this stuff in our body. And that capacity to start to bring things up to the surface, it was very direct, and I was fascinated by it. And I was also working with this map, right? So I could play around with it in that way. But like I said, I didn't have the tools yet of how to be with that. So there was a lot of identification with what was arising. And what I mean by that is, you know, if anger was coming up, I was just angry. And I was trying to fix angry Tina, you know, like there was, I was very much in the washing machine of the emotional experience, and there wasn't very much space. And there was a lot of agenda. But over time, as I started exploring more of the mindfulness aspects, then I was so blessed to be exposed to teachers and teachings that were starting to give me a more direct experience of a vaster part of myself that could hold and meet these emotional currents as they were moving through in more of an effective way. And so for a long period of time, that was really working for me. And that practice was to rest in a broader awareness. You know, as you know, Jen, having worked with me for a long time, that's the way that I would describe it, resting in an open space of awareness. And that worked for me for a really long time. It created this space, and it created mindfulness. Like I could move into a place of being able to witness and hold what I was arising without being quite so identified with it. It wasn't disassociating because I was really being with what was happening, but there was something missing. And then very recently, in the last 2 years, I went through a very intense period of my life where I had some external traumas that sparked a lot of old internal traumas. And the practice that I was holding, which was, you know, my capacity to hold all of that, was not enough. I wasn't able to just be with this and this kind of awareness part of my being. And what was radically missing might sound really obvious, but to me, it wasn't in place. It was in place for other people, but it wasn't for myself. And that was holding everything that was coming up with a deeply loving, compassionate presence. So when I was working with the much deeper traumas, I had to learn how to access very, very comforting, nurturing, nourishing parts of my being to hold those in order to have a transformative effect. I don't know if this is entirely making sense, because there's so much more context I would need to bring, but also suffice to say that off the mat, that then required what I call reparenting, which was actually going in and addressing and being with what was arising in a way that I could go in and kind of reparent these parts that had been traumatized. So it wasn't just resting in a witness, and it wasn't just coming in and being compassionate, but it was also kind of reparenting these parts of my being back into wholeness. So I think yoga hasn't been for me in and of itself the be all and end all, but it's the absolute foundation that I train up the skills that allow me to keep expanding and having a broader capacity to meet these things in myself and others.
Yeah, I think that's great, T. I think, you know, the people who do yin with me also are exposed to a bunch of Jeff Foster because that's the way of being. And we often talk about, you know, embracing these lost parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's something that arises in class as well, you know. So yeah, I think the way that you described that in a short space of time, I mean, yeah, that's beautiful. Let's divert the conversation to talk about something a little more lighter, maybe. So you often say, I don't say this actually. I haven't picked this up from you, but it often comes in my head in my own practice. But it's not something that I teach, that I speak in my classes. But in your classes, you always say, where attention goes, energy flows. What does this mean?
It's a catchphrase. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Where attention goes, energy follows. You know what I could do? If you wouldn't mind, can I share a quote with you from one of my teachers?
Of course.
Great. Do you guys know Reginald Ray?
Never heard of him.
Okay, so he's amazing. He's a Buddhist and he teaches, you know, like embodied base enlightenment practices. He's a somatic therapist that works with Buddhist practices. So I love him. And I'm going to share something about that very thing that I just pulled out of one of his books the other day. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, good. That was easy. Okay. So this like really directly speaks to that. Reginald Ray, when we visualize breathing into body areas, it's not just visualization. We know now from neuroanatomy that when we focus our attention on a particular body part and breathe into it, the metabolic rate of that body part goes up. There's greater oxygenation, there's greater exchange of nutrients, and neurological functioning improves. Bringing awareness into body areas enhances our interoception, and we can talk about that later. Jen knows interoception very well. Mm-hmm. Interoception being our capacity to sense the body from the inside and experiencing the internal nuances from gross to subtle of the soma. With each practice, we are increasing our neurological capacity for interoception. Our thinking mind and the vast field of awareness that is our body are not well consciously connected in most people, just out of habit. The mediating structures that bring information from the body to the left brain, which is the corpus callosum, and other structures are actually fairly fragile, and they tend to atrophy when we don't pay regular attention to our body. But when we start to do these practices, body-focused attention practices, we start creating a healthy creative interchange between body and the conscious mind. Isn't that a great quote?
Yeah, that's amazing. So
it really speaks to it, right? Because there's this experience of increasing interoception, which when we increase interoception, we increase a part of our brain called the insula, and it literally thickens. It grows like a muscle. It gets larger the more embodied practice we do. And then when we're able to do that, we're able to feel more. And the more we can feel, the more we can start to affect and relate to internally. Because where we place our presence, energy literally follows on all these different levels, you know.
Yeah, we often in the class talk about, for example, if we're doing beautiful sleeping swan, for example, then I will often talk about breathing into that space, right? And we know we don't have a lung there, but that sense of, you know, you can expand into that space. It's a bit different when you're practicing like a wood element practice and you are stretching out through this side, and you can expand that side of the lung and feel that sense of like expansion and contraction in that space there, right? You can actually physically feel that as well as energetically feel that, right? But in the hip, it's a different thing, right? Because it's completely an emotional sensation of like breathing your chi and your energy into that space and releasing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the thing, it's not happening through the system of the lungs, it's happening through the system of the pranic network of the subtle anatomy.
Yeah.
So, and energy follows attention. So ways that we, you know, I talk about 3 primary ways that you move energy inside a asana. One is the shape itself, how you're affecting the fascia is going to move chi through the fascia in a certain way by the stretch, compression. The other is the breath, and the third is the attention. Those 3 things together will create your most profound experience, because the energy body responds the most to those 3 things: breath, attention, and the mobilizing of the actual area of the body. So when you're doing that, and like right now, we could all do an exercise where, I mean, it would probably not be necessary because I know you've done a lot of practice, but we could just start feeling our big toes. We could just place all of our attention on our big toes for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and there would be so much sensory information we'd start to tune into. And it's this 2-way thing. We're starting to feel what's already there, because our interoceptive capacity is expanding to feel the subtle nuances of what's there. But also we're affecting it. Where we're placing our attention is affecting what's there. It's becoming more vital, more alive, and giving more feedback of information. So when we get that, then it's amazing what we can do. Like there are internal Qigong practices where they don't move.
Yeah.
They sit there and do, you know, the inner smiles and going into the organs and all of these things with attention alone. So it's really powerful, and it's why being mindful and embodied in an asana is so important.
I think it's super interesting that sometimes, like, I'll go for a walk on the beach in the morning and I don't know that I've got any pain anywhere in my body or anything arising. And I get home and I drop down on the mat and I go, oh my gosh, the sole of my foot is hurting, right? And you notice these things on the mat that you don't notice because your attention is, I don't know, everywhere else in the world and not within the system. Yeah.
And I noticed, I don't know if you noticed this too, Jen, but I noticed that the more interoceptive awareness I have, like the more embodied I am regularly, so it creates that kind of habitual sense, the more access I have to my emotions and the more access I have to my intuition. So
I was going to say that, intuition for sure.
Yeah. When I get on the mat and I start moving, then like as soon as I'm feeling what's in my body, there's emotional content straight away also available to be met. And when I work with it, then lots of insight. Like the more interoception there is, the more access to all of that there is, I find.
Okay, I want to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to let everybody else ask questions because I'm sure like people are burning to ask questions, right? So, and my question is about pain. And you know, this is something that I've asked you about in trainings before, but I want to ask it about it in this space because I know that this is particular, not just for me, but some other people who are here present tonight. So, in yin yoga, we often use the phrase, it's just a sensation. And what does this mean? And especially in relation to people who experience ongoing or chronic pain?
Yeah. Great question. So many layers to this as well. So, I mean, what I'd want to say first is that there's, in yin yoga, my approach is always twofold. And I preface every class by saying the same thing. Even though I work with students again and again, I still repeat it again and again. And that's that, you know, our body is mind-blowingly intelligent. And so it's communicating to us all the time via the language of sensation. And so there are sensations that it's using as a communication system for us to listen to. So at the beginning of each yin yoga class, I often will say, you know, like if you experience any short or sharp or over localized sensations, particularly in a small area or a joint, you want to listen to those sensations that come on out. It's the body alerting you to say, this isn't okay. Like there's something out of whack here. And the beautiful thing about the body is it does that. It's in service of that for all aspects of us. So when I go to eat something, if I'm really tuned into the body, sensations are going to tell me in my body, eat that, don't eat that. When I walk into a room, they're going to tell me whether my body's going to tell me via sensation, whether I'm safe or I'm not safe. I get intuitive hunches. I get like the body is constantly communicating. And then in a more obvious way, it's communicating when there's ill health, you know, like, and we can override that with painkillers and medication and busyness and disembodiment and distraction. And so what I'm not saying by it's just a sensation is, oh, just ignore the sensation. The absolute opposite. Like the sensations are incredibly intelligent communications. But there's another side to that coin, and that's where the mindfulness aspect comes in, is that, you know, in Buddhism, they talk about this very succinctly, but we have this sense of, as human beings, being inside of the habit and the stuckness of craving and aversion, of moving towards pleasure and moving away from pain. And so what many of us recognize is that when there's stuff stored in the body from the past, to feel that again is painful on every level. It's painful on a physical level. It's painful on an emotional level. It challenges us in so many ways. And yet it's only through, you've heard the saying, you have to feel it to heal it. It's only through broadening our window of tolerance to be able to sit with discomfort that we get to be able to heal, that we get to be able to move closer to something and bring that loving presence to something, so we can really listen to it and hear all of that information rather than just pain, I'm out, you know, and moving away. And so in a yin yoga practice, it's so great for that reason, because it allows us to sit and listen to all the stuff that's getting in the way of us having that open listening experience. So when we first come into a sensation, usually when there's discomfort, just because it's the way we're wired, it's our very intelligent stress response system, goes into minor fight or flight, or sometimes major, but minor fight or flight. And the flight is like, I want to get out of here. I want to get out of this posture. I want to shift and fidget and move until it feels different. I want to get out. I want to flight. Or fight, which usually shows up as a narrative of complaint. Right? Everybody knows that experience where it's like, oh, I hate this posture, I hate my hip, or this really hurts, or it's really painful, or I don't like it, I don't want it, or there's this whole narrative of aversion that we could just kind of look at as resistance. And so yin and all mindfulness practices are really training us up to see those two things and to start to go beyond that initial reaction, which isn't a response, it's a reaction, to go beyond that, just to put that aside enough and to then check in. Is it short, sharp, pinching, over localized? Is it dangerous? If it's not, then there's this space to be like, oh, okay, and this is something that's painful, but it's something that's, there's a lot of sensation here that's calling for my attention. And can I meet it? Can I move closer to it? Can I stay inside of it and listen to what it's wanting to offer? And sometimes what it's wanting to offer is just, please just be with me. Please just hold the presence I need to unpack. Because I'm sure you've noticed yourselves, bringing presence to the tissue is all the tissue needs. The tissue starts to unwind and unpack, bathed in your compassionate presence. And so inside of that, then, you know, when there's a whole lot of stuff coming up to the surface, a lot of times there might be an emotional response and then it moves through. But then there are other times where there's lots of internal dialogue, lots of stuff you're going to experience on the mat, and then you'll start experiencing out in your life, and you'll, you know, start to meet the issues that are coming out of the tissues in this kind of multitude of ways. But
so T, can I just bring you back to the part of the question that, what if, right, that the tissue doesn't unpack and there is a sense of chronic pain in the space, right?
That's the bit that I was just about to say.
Okay.
Is that if that, so could you give me an example of that kind of chronic pain just so I can speak to it directly?
Yeah, so in my situation, I have constant pain in my knee that runs up the like the outside edge of the thigh, right up into the hip, and it's always there. It's just that sometimes it's more pronounced and sometimes less, but it is always there, and it has been there now for, I think I'm 5 years in.
Yeah. So when you say always there, you mean always there when you get into a sleeping swan, for example, or always there when you're walking, sleeping in life?
Yeah, always there, like there now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's like lots of different layers to this. And so one is that even though 5 years of deep inquiry is a long time, it's not necessarily like, oh, in 5 years and everything's solved. So, you know, I mean, I've been practicing for 20 something or other years, and I'm constantly unpacking stuff every day. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily think there's an end point. And I don't necessarily think because there's something that's being consistent in there every day that there's no potential for relief. Having said that, I'm always going to like play the two sides of a coin. Having said that, there are some things that are just structural. There are some things that will be there forever. So both those things can be true. I think it's important just to hold light for both of those things.
Yes.
And the beauty of mindfulness and the beauty of the practice of it's just a sensation, which is what I was about to get to, is that one of the ways that we can be more at ease, again in inverted commas, or we can be more, have more capacity, have a broader window of tolerance when we're meeting those really uncomfortable sensations, particularly if they're with us every day, is by starting to recognize this automatic reaction of fight or flight. I don't like it, I don't want it, the narrative, the story. And in a yin yoga mindfulness-based practice, we can start to really notice the story. And we start to notice that the story that's feeding into the resistance is coupling and creating all this extra sensation or pain on top. So that, you know, the more that we can release the narrative of I don't like, I don't want, then the more we're able to like be with the sensations. And then the next step of that is it's just sensations. And meaning, can we be with the sensations as they are without describing them as good or bad? Can we be with them without making them anything in particular? And then when we can, and that doesn't mean that they're pleasant, it just means we're not describing them as unpleasant. So when we're sitting there and can be with the sensations, you may have had the experience that the experience of the sensations starts to shift. When we're not describing it as torturous, then the experience of it can be quite different. And so the mindfulness aspect of the practice is so great for people with chronic pain, not because it makes the chronic pain go away, but because it expands the window of tolerance to be with that in a whole new way, to be with sensation without the narrative and the resistance that just layers so much on top.
But I also think that what you said before, T, is critical in relation to this. It's that loving embrace of that sensation, right? And the understanding of the compassion that you can bring towards yourself in that physical space that can then also expand into other areas of your life, right? So, I mean, I don't ever think that somebody gives you, that you're given pain so that you can learn that, but it is a tool, right? To learn how to be more compassionate towards yourself. Because when I sit in that sleeping swan on that side and I feel those sensations, the challenge is to, I mean, the mind wants to, oh my God, what are you doing? Don't even bother, you know, but the heart wants to embrace, right? Like that. Yeah.
And what that body part wants to receive, it wants to receive, like, you know, we can look at these through the lens of, like, you know, in yoga, we talk a lot about the divine masculine, the divine feminine, or the mother, the father. We can look at these two qualities. I have a teacher that calls it the two wings of presence.
Yeah.
These two qualities of presence that are so key. And one is this capacity to be with the more masculine, kind of broadening out as a wider field of awareness that can hold that and strengthening that capacity. But that softness, that gentleness, particularly because, you know, of the emotional content of that experience. Like if you had a young child, which is often what these parts of us are like, you know, the little ones in us that have been traumatized for whatever reason. If you had a young child come up to you and they were in deep pain, would you go, you know, would you move away from it and be aversion, or would you get in and, like, you know, offer it a whole narrative? Or would you even say, sit down and just watch your sensations?
Yeah.
Or would you pick it up and hug it and nurture it and rock it and tell them you're there and you're, you know, it sounds cheesy, but it's love that heals. It really is. I learned that so much last year because, you know, I mean, I innately do that with other people, but I didn't do it to the same degree that I needed with my own body parts, with my own body. And it just didn't dawn on me until it had to, the depth of which that's important. And then it's transformed my life and continues to. So important, Jen.
All right. Let's let people ask questions if you would like. So unmute yourself and let me know that you want to ask a question. I'm fairly sure there might be someone who's burning to ask.
Oh yeah, I've got a gazillion.
Yeah, I was thinking you might.
But I'll just ask one.
Okay.
So with the connective tissue pathways, how are they connected with the neural pathways in yoga? I know how they are in terms of anatomy, but in terms of yoga.
In Chinese medicine, they don't talk about it in terms of neural pathways. So they talk about, it's like two separate systems. In Chinese medicine, they talk about qi following blood. So it's more in alignment with where blood is flowing, the circulatory system. And it doesn't really work so much with the nervous system. In yoga, because my background is more in Chinese medicine and yogic movement, but not as much yogic philosophy, you're probably much more in depth with the yogic philosophy than I am, because it hasn't been my area of focus. But so I don't actually know how the yogis perceive their meridian network with the neural system, because I work mainly with the Chinese, but they don't necessarily correlate those two systems together. They see them as separate. But one of the channels, which is the bladder channel, which runs from, so it runs from the little toe and right up the back line of the body, right up the back of the legs, and then it runs up either side of the spine, over the back of the neck, over the head, and then it penetrates through the inside of the eyes and energetically penetrates into the brain. And so when you're working with the nervous system, wanting to tonify frayed nerves or work with anxiety, or you work with that back line. So that particular of the 12 channels, that particular line is how you would work more with the nervous system. But in terms of how the entire fabric of the neural pathways and the meridian pathways intersect, I've never seen that described specifically. That doesn't mean that it's not, it just means I haven't been exposed to that.
And what about with the notion of, unless someone else has a question, because I can just keep going.
Go for it, Tony.
With the neural pathways in my work as a psychotherapist, I work only with complex trauma, so childhood traumas. I'm very familiar with many different child parts of oneself. But in the neural pathway learning that I've done, it's like you need 1,000 rewrites of that neural pathway for it to actually stick.
Yeah.
How then might you do it differently using yin yoga?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about your direct experience, Tony, but for me, I've had two opposing experiences with that. I've had some things that I've carried around in my system and in my belief system and in my tissue for eons that I've had this experiential massive shift that has just anchored a new part of my being and brought in more of me that wasn't online before. And there's like a shift on that level. And it happens, there's kind of an immediacy to it. And then I've had many, many, many other times where there's been a shift and then that has to be entrained again and again and again through retraining neural networks, So both of those things have been true for me in my experience. What about you and your clients? Have you noticed both happening or mainly just one?
No, both happening. I do a lot of mindfulness and breathing, getting them to breathe both into their pain and out of emotional pain. Sometimes something they're ready for it and it just clicks really quickly and quite amazingly in 1 or 2 sessions. And then they're like, I don't think I need to see you anymore. And I go, that's fantastic. Yeah. See you later. Yeah. But for others, it takes a lot longer.
Yeah. I think that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
From my experience. And do you work with internal family systems, or are you familiar with internal family systems?
I am familiar with internal family systems.
I really love that work because I feel like it integrates. I've worked with it quite a bit in my own journey. And I feel like it's such a beautiful integration of these systems because it's not just, it's not mindfulness, meaning it's not just mindfulness, meaning there's this sense of like separating from and just witnessing, but it is anchoring in this sense of self, which you could refer to as the adult self, but you could also refer it to, like in yoga, as we do, to self with a capital S, to higher self, faster self, true self, and then that self going in and integrating and reparenting and interacting with these parts. And I really love that because I feel like in my journey, therapy that has just been about working with the parts without having any access to that larger sense of self hasn't had that same like, oh my, aha kind of, I feel like it's connecting to that broader part that brings more of those big shifts. Rather, but also I've been a part of spiritual practices and systems that are very kind of only connecting to that self and not going in and doing the actual therapeutic work with the smaller parts. And there's lots of disassociation that happens and lots of unchecked trauma that comes to the surface. So I feel like that's a really beautiful marriage, that system.
I would agree. Can I ask one more, unless other people have? I don't want to.
Can I just see, Tony, if anyone else has any questions, and then we'll come back to you. Who else has a question? Really? Okay, I'm leaving space. I'm leaving space. Just leave space for a moment. Really? No one else has a question? I'm surprised. Come on, don't be shy. It's only us.
Practices, maybe some things that come up for you in your practice that you've been, like some edges that you felt challenged by, or anything around direct experience. I'd love to talk about that.
All right, everyone's feeling a bit nervous tonight. All right, Tone, over to you, mate.
Right. I'll hold the platform. I have a client who has a really serious mixed connective tissue disease. And it's mixed. It's an autoimmune disease. It's mixed because it has rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Ross River fever, scleroderma, and one other I can't remember.
Oh.
And every aspect of their body, soft tissue, joints, bones, muscles are affected. How can that client is quite keen on doing some trauma-informed yoga, and I'm a bit nervous about that.
Yeah, I definitely am not. I wouldn't feel comfortable advising them because I'm not expert enough in those conditions. I would definitely say go and speak to a doctor, but I would always suggest an integrative doctor that is open-minded and has some awareness of broader practices. Like there are some really good doctors that are also Chinese doctors, for example.
Yes. Yep.
I would definitely suggest them to go and just to see how the connective tissue is behaving and how it responds to pressure on the bones, how it responds to certain movements. I wouldn't feel like, and I would hope that no yoga teacher would give advice for that kind of condition, because I don't think we're trained for it. We're not doctors.
Yeah, I don't think it's about giving advice. I think it's that they want to start doing yoga because all their friends are doing yoga and their partner's doing yoga, and kind of everyone's doing yoga but them.
Yeah.
And they wake up in the morning and they can't stand up straight.
Yeah.
Like they sometimes come into the room and they're kind of like all hunched over, and I just say, just sit gently in the chair and use as many cushions as you need. Yeah. Kind of thing to, and let's just practice breathing.
Wow. You know what I would suggest that, and I, this is something I would love someone to come to me with, I mean, not with you and your client, but like if it was someone in my vicinity, where the doctor and the yoga teacher would interact and talk. So the doctor could let the yoga teacher know what's safe and what's not safe, and more specificity about the condition. And then because yoga affects so many aspects of the human, right?
That's right.
So they could still get the spiritual benefits and the energetic benefits and the organ benefits and the mindfulness benefits and all of these things, and do certain postures that are safe for the body and not do others that are not. So it'd be great for the yoga teacher and the doctor to have a conversation and then create something specific. That would be amazing. I would love it if a doctor reached out to me and was like, this is what's going on, let's figure this out. I would love that.
Yeah. I'd love to meet a doctor like that. So
right.
So Tone, I have a question that's come. My lovely sister has asked a question. Hello, lovely sister.
Good.
She says, is there a time of day where it's best to practice yin? What's your advice, T?
So what I first would say would be, Linda, when do you like to practice yin? Or do you practice yin?
Yeah, I do, and generally of a nighttime. But that led into my next question, where I'm usually so highly stressed out. Yeah. It takes me the entire hour before I can actually wind down. Yeah. And then it's like I sometimes wonder if it would be better to change the time of the day because of that, or is that just a good thing that you've actually been able to spend that hour going, you know, with your mind wandering everywhere except where it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I would always, my response would always be, you know, like, because, you know, it's really about just exploring your direct experience and seeing what actually works for you rather than someone saying, do it at this time. But I think that so in terms of yin and yang, the evening is the more yin time of the day. And so when you get up in the morning, the body would usually, but not always, it's so individual, but usually want to do something more dynamic. So you would do more of a flowing practice or a hatha practice or something in the morning, and then the evening time would be a more yin or restorative practice. Now, I really hear what you're saying in terms of that you get home at the end of the day and there's so much internal activity that it can be hard to practice. And I'd have two responses to that. One, I would say that's the best time to practice because we're not like wanting to arrive on the mat where we're wanting to be. We're wanting to get on the mat to work through that. That's what the mat's for, you know. But also, and also because you really, if you're training up the skills of mindfulness and how to be with a busy mind in the same way that how to be with an empty mind, like how to be with the mind and still create spaciousness and non-reactivity, then the best way to do that is to train it up with things how they actually are. There's that. And then the other thing that I would say is that I do a practice that I call embodied unwinding, which is coming to the mat and doing however much movement it takes before a lot of the stuff is unwound, and then I can go into a deeper practice, and I like to combine them together. And what that looks like is usually I'll start on all fours and I'll invite just some simple unwinding movements that I'm orchestrating, meaning I might unwind the neck. Maybe Jen does a bit of this with you, I'm not sure. Unwind the shoulders, do some, you know, some movements that just embody my attention and get things moving. And then I'm tuning in more and more. I'm enhancing interoception. And then the more I'm listening, I'm like, oh God, I'm carrying all this stuff in my left shoulder from today. And I just start to allow my left shoulder to do what it needs to do. And then, oh, that's revealing something in my lower back. And then I might be working with my pelvis in some way. And usually all of this is on all fours. And I'm just kind of slowly moving from being the doer that's orchestrating a practice to being the listener that's allowing my body to start to dictate, oh, I want stretch here. I want space here. I want breath here. And so in that, what starts to happen is that the body is starting to unwind from the inside out. And so there's this, and it's very, it's exactly what you need. It's not a practice that you're getting from someone else. It's your body giving you exactly what you need. And it's listening to that language of sensation that we were talking about before. So then what happens in my experience is as the body starts to unwind, I get more and more out of the way. And eventually the body is just kind of doing its thing. It's unraveling. And then in that, if there's mental stuff to unravel, if there's emotional stuff to unravel, there's space for that. And then once this unwinding has happened and I'm all kind of warmed up and softer and released some stuff, then I go into my deeper yin postures. So that's the way that I like to practice whenever I do it, morning or evening or whenever I do it. But that could be really helpful for you at the end of the day. So both those things to be true. Work with what is, with a busy mind, or do a practice that helps kind of unwind some stuff and then go deeper, depending what you want to work with.
Is that good, Linda? She's so unwound.
Yes,
now.
Thank you. I want to been to yoga. I am unwound.
Yeah, nice. Hey, so I just want to name up that I know some people might need to go, and that would be okay. It wouldn't be rude if you dropped off. But before, if you wanted to drop off, before you do, I just want to say two things. One is T's an amazing teacher, and I have learned so much from her. But she's also just a super cool human, and it's really nice to be friends with her. But she's moving her trainings online. So if any of you are interested in training with T, you can always ask me and I can hook you up with what she's got going on, right? Or you can find her on all the socials, and she has a website. Doesn't always keep her website up to date, but that's okay. We'll figure that. If you want to know what she's up to, you can always ask me, and I can find out, or I might already know. So if you're interested in doing more stuff with her. And also the other thing I wanted to let you know is that I am planning some more of these kind of conversations, and I've been speaking to a very good friend of T's called Brent, who's Yeah, look at her. She's so excited.
Oh.
He's one of her besties and someone that I've met because of tea. And he's a doctor of, he's an acupuncture guy. And so he's going to come and give us some more insight into Chinese medicine. So he's agreed to do that. I just haven't got him nailed down for a date yet. He's currently in Greece, right, T?
Yeah, he's in
Yeah.
Paros.
Yeah. Yeah, so him and I have been messaging on WhatsApp, and he's agreed to do a session for you guys, but I just haven't nailed down the timing. So we can have another session where we talk more about the meridian pathways and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Go deeper into that.
We'll be able to have a really interesting conversation with Brent, especially right now around Chinese medicine, the meridians and the fascia, because I mean, Brent teaches the Chinese medicine on my trainings, my yin training and yoga therapy training, as well as just being an amazing Chinese doctor. But he's been delving even deeper into working with the fascia in the last sort of 12 months. And we've been having some really juicy conversations. So you guys have fun.
Yeah. So that opportunity is coming up as well. I'll let you know about that. So if you want to drop off, you can, or if you have another question for T, are you okay to hang out, T, if someone else has another question for you? Yeah. Okay, cool. So your choice. Whatever feels good for you. But if you want to ask another question, totally open.
Bye.
I want to ask a question.
Okay, Corinne, go.
Oh, bye, whoever's going. I thought someone was saying bye.
Oh, I was going to ask a question. I'll go after you.
Okay, you go, Corinne, first.
Cool. My question is around feelings. I know that I have asked this question to Jen before, but I still haven't
resolved
my head around it. Yeah, and sorry for my English for the moment. More often when we're doing practice, the words come about notice how you feel, notice what's happening with you, and more often I don't feel anything. Like I feel like there is nothing there, and it's very hard to connect. And I just want to know how do you move from there to feel? Or is it always okay to not feel? Is it a thing to not have a feeling?
And can I clarify, when you say I don't feel, do you mean you don't feel physical sensations? You don't feel emotions? You don't feel...
Mostly emotions and inside rather than being outside. Sensation outside I feel, but more sensation emotionally and mentally and inside. Yeah.
Got it. And when you say sensations outside, do you mean other people's, or do you mean closer to the skin, like a pain in your shoulder or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, lots of different ways to talk to that. So I think that everybody is unique and different and have different levels of emotionality and sensitivity. And there's so many ways of describing that, like so many systems, whether you're talking about your human design or your Chinese sign or your astrology or your birth date, or, you know, all these things, that there are just different ways of explaining the diversity of human experience. So you don't have to feel anything. You are you, uniquely you, perfect as you are. Inside of that, often when we've had experiences in our lifetime that have been really challenging and things that have been too difficult to feel, then we have survival mechanisms, coping strategies, which are incredibly useful. We can be so grateful for them in the past, where they've created subtle or not so subtle disassociations, where we don't feel things because we go into what's called a freeze response. So in a trauma, there's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. And freeze is where something's been quite overwhelming for the system. And so we've kind of frozen it and developed the capacity not to have to feel it. So you can imagine it's a very efficient coping strategy. But what it does over time is it severs our capacity to feel all kinds of things. And that can be eventually potentially problematic, especially if you are somebody that's interested in self-inquiry and wants to kind of get in touch with all that's available in this internal universe. To do that, we need to navigate through the feeling realm. So it's absolutely totally possible to bring it back online. And the best way to do that is regular embodied practice. And so really simple, regular embodied practice, I would say, is the best way to start. Like doing something where you're placing your attention again and again and again on different body areas. So if you're doing a simple neck rotation, you do it slowly and you're feeling front of the throat, sides of the neck, back of the neck. You're over time feeling, oh, when I open the front of the throat, I can feel that in my chest, in my belly. And the more that you expand this capacity to feel your sensations, the fatter the insula will become, the part of the brain, the more embodied you'll become, and the more you'll start to contact certain, more depth of feeling on all levels. Because when you're working with a physical body, you're working with all dimensions. They slowly start to wake up. And then to explore it more specifically, if I was in the same place as you, or you can even talk to Jen about it, you can work with different meridian pathways that affect different organs, right? So there's an area, it's not an organ, it's a sac of fascia that lives around the heart, and it's called the pericardium. It's also known as the heart protector. And its job is to work as kind of an energetic filter that protects the heart in an emotional way. And so if you were to come to me and we were to do yoga therapy, I'd be exploring practices with you that opened the heart protector to kind of unclog the filter that can invite more what's called Shen, the energy that's inside the heart, to reveal itself and to reveal more capacity for feeling. So there are ways you can do it a little more specifically, but just getting on the mat every day and really staying focused rather than letting your attention wander can really just start to open up all kinds of juicy stuff.
T, I think your response to Corinne is like spot on, because she also comes from a cultural context where there's lots of trauma, right? And so Corinne carries that within who she is, right? Like that, because it's not just about who she is, but also, I mean, all of us, right? The way that we grew up within the society that we are located, right? And so she's got a whole country's culture of trauma hanging out with her, right? So this heart protective stuff that you're talking about is very much something that happens within her cultural context. Corinne, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I actually, you just touched it, because I was going to say, I was just thinking about it in the back of my mind. But I don't know how to talk about it. But it does explain a lot, and yeah.
Yeah. What I would say, Corinne, too, is like when you are dealing with personal trauma, intergenerational trauma, ancestral trauma, like what I definitely learned from my own experiences is that piece of coming in with kindness and compassionate, tender qualities of awareness to your body and to yourself is the environment within which those parts of your being will feel safe to reveal themselves. Like just to kind of come in like a bull at a gate, or just to come in with just awareness alone, meaning just attention, but without a flavor of safety that comes with tenderness and love and kindness, then probably won't, if your intention is to increase your capacity to feel, I think that to really be mindful of those two wings of presence, being with your body in your practice, is going to create the most fertile environment for that.
And I think in my knowledge of this girl, she needs a little bit of challenge around that, because she plays on the edges, and she will walk towards feeling sensation, and then she'll run away. Correct? Yeah.
Corinne, would it be safe to say that you're someone that like shows up really compassionately for other people?
Corinne? She for sure does.
What was the question?
Would it be safe to say that this is just my intuitive sense with you, that you're someone that shows up with a lot of compassion for other people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that capacity is like one of your gifts, I would say. And it's that quality that you bring to support others that if you bring to yourself would probably create a big transformation for you.
T, your new cat is super noisy.
I know. I've got him in the other room. He's not happy about it. If he was here, it'd be so much noisier.
Okay, Rhiannon, you wanted to ask a question. Come on.
Yeah, I just want to say that's so brave of you, Corinne. Thank you for sharing that with us. I also just wanted to say, yeah, I found this very interesting, and you know, one aspect was you talking about the muscles and everything, how they work. Yeah, like I'm someone who has been in a car accident and had whiplash. At the start of the year, went rafting, and someone said how my neck sort of did the same thing that I experienced in that accident. So yeah, I found it really interesting to someone said that your muscle can remember that, I guess, and that sort of what you said relayed back into that. I guess my question is really more about in our day-to-day at the moment, how, yin, I guess, sometimes we don't, because we're working from home, well, I am, and some of us are in lockdown. How can we integrate sort of little bits of mindfulness into the day? But then can yin be something we can do that's like something like a 5-minute, or is it more like you have to do a whole like practice? Also, do you have any suggestions for how we can start to develop that mindfulness, become more acquainted with it, as you said? The more you do it, the more you become better. I tried when we were in isolation to do 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, but then, we started getting more out in the community, but now we're more shutting down again. So how do we get into that and make sure, any tips, I guess?
Oh my gosh, Rhiannon, lots of questions.
Yeah.
Good questions. Great questions. Awesome. So there were 3 things that I heard there that I'd like to speak to. One, I heard you speaking about the impact of your accidents and the whiplash and how that's stored in the body and the memory that contains that you're learning about. 2, about yin yoga, and do we need to do a whole practice, or how can we integrate yin? Yeah. And then 3, how can we integrate mindfulness just in daily life, especially now when we're in lockdown? Is that right? Would they be the 3 main points there? So first of all, I would speak to the first piece, and that I know we're here to talk about yin, but I'm just going to speak to embodied unwinding a little because it's just so powerful. That practice that I was describing before, of just creating some time to come into your body and start to move it and listen to it and allow it to slowly unwind, which, it requires some continuity, some practice. That, hands down, for me has been the most powerful way of my body revealing the places where it's stuck, particularly from injuries, even physical injuries in the past, and unwinding it in the way that it needs, that I would never have been able to figure out with my mind. And an example I'll give is I have had a few accidents myself, car accidents, and I had one accident where I walked out onto the road in Spain, where the cars go in the opposite direction, and looked the wrong way in the traffic. And by the time I looked to see the car coming in the direction I was supposed to look in, it hit me, and I hit the road really hard. Like I got hit by a car and smashed this side of my head like this. So this side of my neck and this shoulder for many years was like all jammed up. And I would get massage and give it temporary relief, and then it would come back away.
Yeah.
And then I was doing this one particular session. I was working with a teacher who teaches what's called nonlinear movement, which is basically embodied unwinding in this particular environment. And we were doing a lot of it, like 6 hours a day for, a week. So I was kind of halfway in, so my body was pretty warmed up, like I'd been doing a lot of unwinding. And then all of a sudden this started unpacking itself, which means the body's just kind of spontaneously moving. It's called a fascial unwind. And, this is kind of doing what it needs to do. And as that was happening, I hadn't thought about that accident for, 15 years or so.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I was having all the memories of that accident. Like I saw myself hitting the road. And I was getting all the information about what had happened to that part of the body and what, and I was like, oh, and I made the connections and it unwound. And then the problem didn't entirely go away. There's still some work to do, but I would say 80% of it unpacked, which is pretty amazing. So just to speak to that your body's intelligence is so beyond what we can imagine, and that there are practices where you can get in and just let the body's intelligence undo structural stuff from injury and accident. Yeah, right. The second piece was, do you have to do a yin practice every day, or are there other ways to access mindfulness?
Yeah.
So I think that the second part and the third part of your question kind of really go hand in hand. So I'll speak to them together. For me, mindfulness is simply paying attention to what's happening in the moment as it is. And we can do that at any time. It's just that, you know, when we're busy and distracted and we're needing the mind to function and work things out and respond to people and do things, it can feel less accessible. But the more sitting practice or yin yoga practice, for example, that we do, the more we just start to train up being more aware of awareness. So then awareness becomes something that's aware of what's happening all the time. It's always there. It's just we're starting to recognize it more. So what I would say is, yeah, absolutely have a regular practice because it really helps. But a regular practice can also look like, I have one teacher that, what did she call it? She said, short moments of awareness many times until awareness is obvious all the time. So, you know, that can just look like, and a good way to do this is to set a little timer on your phone. That can be one way to do it.
I put it in calendar, I think, like my work calendar, but I just find it hard to do like an hour or something.
Yeah. So what I meant actually is setting a little timer on your phone so that, say, once an hour it goes ding, and you go close your eyes and be aware of your feet on the floor, the sounds you can hear, the taste in your mouth, sensations in your body. 2 minutes, and then carry on with your day. And then in an hour again, ding, and you stop and you feel. You know, like if there's these little reminders. Another way that I do it often is I have times of the day where I do routine. So every time I'm brushing my teeth and every time I'm going to the toilet and every time I'm in the shower, they're my three areas because I do them every day. I stop and pay a lot of attention because I do them every day. And if I'm busy, I'm still going to do them every day. So in those mundane things, I'm aware of the feeling of the water on my back. I'm aware of the sensations on my gums. I'm aware of the thoughts that are going through my mind, the feeling in my heart. All I'm doing is paying attention to what's here. And the important part about mindfulness is it's a non-judgmental acceptance of what's here. It's not like, oh, that's here and it shouldn't be here, or that's here and I need to do something about it. It's just becoming aware of what is as it is. And so you can find these little ways of just saying every time you go to the toilet, I'm just going to sit and, you know, pay attention to the sounds I can hear and what I'm feeling in my body, or, you know, like however you want to add those little dollops. And those little dollops really count. And that saying is, you know, until awareness becomes obvious at all time. It's something that's like we were talking about before about the neural pathways. Tony was talking about the neural anatomy. You've heard the saying, what wires together, fires together. Have you heard that before? Yeah, so it's just like habits, the things that we repeat over and over again become our way of being. So just training up doing those little moments starts to just inevitably train up more awareness moment to moment until awareness is present lots of the time, you know.
I think
don't have to do an hour every day.
One of those things is even taking that moment to notice, oh, my mind is super busy.
Yeah.
No, that's even noticing. We're not just noticing like, oh, my feet or my whatever, like also like what's happening in that mind. And it might just be, or noticing, oh my gosh, I'm super angry right now. And noticing that anger and not judging it, right? Just noticing that it's there. And I think that's the thing that becomes tricky in those moments where either the emotion or the mind is in a way that maybe you don't want it to be. You've already prejudged it, right?
Yeah.
So noticing it without the judgment is what's super important.
Totally, because there's nothing wrong with a busy mind and there's nothing wrong with anger. Like all of those things are just what they are. It's just if awareness isn't included in that and we're totally identified and wrapped up in that anger or wrapped up in the mind, then there's not a lot of space or choice or responsiveness.
It's even those of us who are
that's there, that's for sure.
Yeah, those of us who are like mega organized, right, and got the list and got the thing and la 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 whatever. It's just noticing that that's what it is. It's not judging that, right? It's just it's okay.
Yeah.
So
it's just bringing in awareness. It's just bringing awareness online. It's not bringing awareness online to judge or change what's here. It's just bringing awareness online, because the awareness that means that more of you is online, and that part of you is where intuition lives and where knowing lives and where love lives and where all these inherent parts of our being are in awareness. Awareness doesn't need to come in and get rid of anything. Awareness is just aware. It's usually in the background. We're not noticing it. So all we're doing is bringing in more awareness, and everything else stays exactly the same. We're not changing anything.
Yeah.
And things start to happen of their own accord.
And you don't need to have got up early and drank the green juice and been for a walk and la 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 for awareness to be there, right? Awareness is there all the time. Oh, that's interesting. I got up and I ate 3 hash browns. Like, you know, like, because it's that non-judgment that enables the transformation of those things to the transmutation of those things to occur, whereas totally. it's the punishment of the self that stops those things from transmuting.
Absolutely. And an uncontrived transmutation. It's
yeah,
not a part of you coming in and trying to make something happen.
Yeah, it's not forced.
If it's for your benefit. Hash browns are also great.
Thanks, T. I have to disappear because I have a meeting now, but it's been great.
Oh, thanks, Bron. Enjoy your meeting, darling.
Yeah, it goes till 11. Bye.
Yeah, love you. Message me if you're bored.
Thank you.
All right. Now Lou has a question for you, T. She's been holding on to it. Go, Lou.
No, I didn't have. Okay, so I have a question, but I don't know how to word it. But basically, I have chronic head pain or chronic headaches, and I was sort of wondering how that comes back to sort of maybe the meridians or the practice of yin, or like how that can then come in and help, because I have had this for maybe about a year now, and I've seen sort of different people, like obviously GPs and then you know, other people in India that Jen sort of recommended, and I'm still getting quite intense pain. And I don't know really where my question is going, but I thought it'd be really silly to miss this opportunity to ask you maybe your opinion, or like, yeah.
Can I clarify with you, is when you say head pain, do you mean headache? Do you mean muscular tension? What do you mean by head pain?
Like, I've been calling it headaches, or a headache, yeah.
It feels like a headache.
Yeah.
And is it a migraine? Like, do you get like the eyes shutting down and feeling nauseous and needing to tune out light and those kind of things?
Yeah, so I get a whole bunch of different things, exactly what you described, but I also get just a lot of like squeezing, or like sort of pressure, more so on one side, but it sort of changes constantly.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing again, I'll say that, you know, I'm not a doctor, so I can just speak to some possibilities, and then always it would just be about like following those arrows, and maybe it resonates, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's lots of reasons. So, you know, you could look at things like hormones. It could have something to do with hormones. You could look at something like heavy metals, having high levels of toxic metals in the system, which is quite common with our environment these days, can lead to pretty intense headaches and head pain. Structurally, like I've definitely had some misalignments in the top vertebrae. And I just got a chiropractic adjustment, but then had to wear a neck brace for a while so that my head wasn't moving, and then it totally went away and never came back. So it was structural on that level. If it's to do with tension in a particular area that's not necessarily coming from the vertebrae, it's somewhere in the fascial network, then in terms of the meridians, there are 6 meridian pathways that feed into the head, and they feed into different organs. So for example, the gallbladder channel, it's here in the temples, and it kind of takes over that whole side of the head area, and then travels from the base of the skull down the back outside of the neck, over the top of the shoulder and into the shoulder blade. So the gallbladder channel is often the area where we hold an enormous amount of tension. So there are points along that channel, like gallbladder 20 and gallbladder 21. You could look up those points online with acupressure, for example, and you could massage those and see if that makes any difference, like massaging your temples, massaging those points. You could go to an acupuncturist, get them to needle it, and you could get them to do tongue and pulse diagnosis to see if there's something going on with the gallbladder. So there's ways of working with it like that. The bladder channel that I mentioned before. So, you know, sometimes if you get those tension headaches and you like pinch this part of your eyes, like you naturally do that. So these points are called bladder 1. They're the end of the bladder channel. And that might relate more to either tension around the center of the neck or the vertebrae or the nervous system, because that channel relates to like nervous tension, anxieties. The channel on the side of the head, gallbladder, is more about our relationship with control, how our system responds when things don't show up quite the way that we would like them to, if there's impatience, frustration, irritation, intolerance, those kind of things, and that builds up that tension. It often stores there. It also can have to do with the jaw. If there's a lot of tension in the nervous system or some unfelt or met trauma in the system, there can be locking, holding patterns in the jaw, and that transfers to all kinds of tension in all the fascia of the head and down the spine. So there's lots of different areas, you know, different ways that you could look into it. So my suggestion would just be that they would be some places to start. And then when you start exploring, to really stay as embodied as you can, to feel like, is that me? You know, does this resonate? Does that sound like a pattern that I hold? Is that something I notice? And really allow your body to kind of tell you. I hope that helps. It's not super specific, but some areas.
Yeah. My question wasn't very specific.
Right.
But no, it really did help. I took lots of notes.
And Lou, by the way, it's more than 12 months, honey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I rounded it down.
Do you grind your teeth, Lou? Do you know if you grind your teeth?
No, I've always said no to that question. Yeah.
Okay, great. And that's the thing, like, you know, going to different specialists and them asking questions, and do I resonate with this? Is that an arrow to follow? Oh, no, that's not it. So maybe it's hormones. No, that's not it. You know, like, so always decide for yourself, like really tune in for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, my darlings. Well, I think we might leave this lovely conversation here. I think it's been amazing. And T, I can't thank you enough for dropping in with us. I think, you know, it's just been great to hang out with you and to have you share your amazing wisdom. And I mean, you've done so many years of study as one thing, but also it's the way that you embody the practice, and you are the practice that really speaks the loudest. And yeah, I mean, that's why I appreciate you as a teacher, just so authentic. So yeah, thanks for being with us, and I hope you've all enjoyed the experience, and I'll see you on the mat very soon, huh?
Thank you for putting this together. It's such a pleasure.